bring John McMullen for another edition of Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. And, John, the Eagles back at work today, kind of, sort of, maybe, not really. But, yeah, Nate Sudfeld finally signed his tender in time for the offseason work. So they got that finally. I know people were texting in last week about why hasn't he and when will he. Nate Sudfeld has finally signed, and you would imagine he is signed and he will be the backup.
Yeah, he's penciled in as the backup, and the Eagles kind of mentioned they would prefer to not just give him the job and have some veteran competition, but hasn't worked out that way. It's really difficult to get anybody to come in as a potential backup. In other words, if you have any credibility on your resume, you're going to want to be promised that job as opposed to just a promise to compete. So I always thought it was going to be difficult for the Eagles to bring in a named quarterback to compete with Nate Sudfeld. And I think the second part is they do have confidence and they do believe that Nate Sudfeld is ready to take that leap and become the backup quarterback. And that's why they tendered him at a second-round level. There was no question that he was going to sign the tender, and off-season work starts today, April 15th, and it's important if you're a quarterback to be there from a leadership standpoint. So he signed it today, and he was in.
Now, in a perfect world, are the Eagles comfortable with him being their backup, or would they like to find someone to either push him or compete with him?
Well, I think in a perfect world, they like Nick Foles to be the backup, but they went with that as long as possible. You always want a proven commodity to be the backup, but it's easier said than done. I mentioned earlier this offseason, even when you talk about guys like Ryan Tannehill and Blake Bortles, who signed elsewhere to be backups, even guys like that who flamed out at their original spots as starters, they're not going to come in with the opportunity to compete. They're going to want to be promised the backup job, and that's what Ryan Tannehill got in Tennessee. That's what Blake got in Los Angeles. So it was always going to be difficult to bring in somebody of that caliber. Some people speculated Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I mean, he got a starting job. So it's difficult, and the Eagles were lucky to go as long as they did with a backup as viable as Nick Foles. And now you have to move forward, and you've been grooming Nate Sudfeld for 2 years, essentially. And it's his time. And the hope is Carson Wentz is finally healthy for 16 games, and it won't be an issue.
Yeah, John, and I'd like to get your opinion of Sudfeld. I mean, we all know Foles was almost the perfect backup. He was fairy tale-esque. But Sudfeld he finds himself in a very pressure spot if he gets called on. The other guy performed, when he was called on. Is Nate Sudfeld a guy that you like and think can step in as a backup? And, the backup's role is when the starter goes out, that the season doesn't go off the rails, that guy can keep the season going. Nobody expects them to win the Super Bowl until they do. So is Nate Sudfeld being looked at as someone who can keep the season on track if Wentz misses a game here or a game there? Is he that kind of guy?
Yeah, I think now you scale back to that. Typically, what you want out of your backup is a guy who can keep your head above water if he needs to play for 2 or 3 weeks. And things won't completely fall apart, as you mentioned. Look, if Carson gets injured in week 2 or week 3, the Eagles aren't going to do very well. But, I know people don't want to hear this, and I know I'll get hate mail and hate Twitter, but I'll throw it out there. I mean, if you go back to 2017, I don't know why, but people forget who did the heavy lifting. The Eagles weren't in a position to win the Super Bowl if it wasn't for Carson Wentz. He was going to be the MVP of this league, and he got hurt in December.
I remember that.
And Nick did a phenomenal job. But if you're being completely honest, if Carson gets hurt in week 3, the Eagles aren't going to the playoffs, never mind winning the Super Bowl. That's just it. I'm sorry if people don't believe that, but that's the case. That was the MVP, and Zach Ertz said it today. He should have been the MVP even after getting hurt. That's how well he played that season. And all the heavy lifting was done. Home field advantage was essentially locked up. All the Eagles had to do was win one game, and they were able to do it. And then they had every game at home, and Nick deserves all the credit in the world from that standpoint. But now you're back to a typical backup situation, and all that is if somebody sprains an ankle or sprains a knee, and you need somebody for 2 or 3 or even 4 weeks, you hope to get out of that at 500 and keep going, as I said, in a positive or at least not a negative direction.
Talking with John McMullen at JF McMullen, Football at 4, here on the Sports Bash, live on 97.3 ESPN. So Sudfeld is back. He will be the backup. He signed, well, we think he'll be the backup. 1 year, $3 million. He was a restricted free agent, and he was given a second-round tender back in March. So he will be the backup here. How about the story over the weekend? Jalen Mills, this is bizarre. So he got into a fist fight, apparently, with Wizards forward Devin Robinson. Who had ever heard of Devin Robinson before, right?
Nope.
But got into a fight with Jalen Mills, and apparently it was over. It was over.
It was over. I reckon this town isn't the big enough for the both of us.
Right, like you don't play for this team, the Redskins, so you need to get on out of here.
He said, "Hey, you don't play here, so leave." And he said, "I will not."
And this was at 3:00 in the morning, so nothing good ever happens at that time. But is Jalen Mills in danger of getting in some more trouble?
I don't think so. From everything I've heard, he was not the instigator of the issue. And you mentioned who knows Devin Robinson. Well, the Wizards don't know him anymore either. They've quickly moved on, and they did that day, that morning, when they realized he was the instigator. And I guess that means he can't get into fights in D.C. because he's no longer on a sports scene. So I don't think anything is going to come of it. Jalen actually got cited, which is technically arrested, but I think he paid $35. It's not a serious situation. And the NFL, as we know, they can essentially do whatever they want from a personal conduct standpoint. Jalen had an issue back in college that was cleared up through pretrial diversion, but that would not count on his NFL record. I don't even think he's going to be suspended for a game or anything cursory of that nature. I think it's going to quickly be forgotten. But you're right. I mean, nothing good happens at 3:00. We're all young. We've all done that. And I often say now that I'm older, guys should be smart enough when they're professional athletes to probably not be doing that type of thing. But when you're young, you want to have fun. And everybody does it. And maybe Jalen learns a little bit from it, and just, if he wants to have fun, have people over to his house.
You tweeted a little bit today about Jason Kelce, and I think it's interesting, just his situation in general. End of the year, he said, I got to think about coming back. We didn't buy into that, but he is kind of getting to that age where he'll start saying that now at the end of every season, and you're not really sure when it's going to be true or when it's not going to be true. But what did you take from what he said today? And he also said, he talked about Jordan Mailata, which I think is interesting, and that's a player a lot of people have their eyes on.
He also said, by the way, that he played with a sprained MCL, a broken foot, and a torn elbow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Minor.
he's an all-pro. He's like a
buried the lead on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he plays through everything.
Crazy.
And I reported at the time on 973ESPN.com. He wasn't really – what that was about was his contract, and all the guaranteed money was done on his contract, and the Eagles did tweak it and extend him and guarantee his money for this year. So that was more of a contract thing than anything else, and Jason confirmed that it was really he always knew he wanted to play, and he just had to he's in a different place in his life. He's married now, so he's got to talk it over with his wife. And he's older, and he is banged up, and he's coming off the season, whereas Mike just said all those things he played through. So you see it a lot with veteran players. After the season is over, they're like, I don't want to go through this again. And then they sit and they get healthy, and April 15th rolls around, and they say, I don't want to sit at home. I can still play. I'm an all-pro player, and I think that's what Jason kind of went through. He just needed to recharge his batteries. But, yeah, at this stage, with all veteran players, especially now when you talk about concussions and the better education and maybe life realizing won't be all that great at 55 or 60 if you play through some of those things, you do have players thinking about it a little bit harder, a little bit more. And I think that's where Jason was, but he never seriously considered retirement.
Do you think this team is, I know this is a silly question, but do you think they're prepared and they have the energy and focus to start today gearing for a Super Bowl run? I mean, coming off this past year and everything that we talked about and that this team dealt with, and with Carson and Nick and now Carson's health, and the list goes on and on. Are they ready and capable, and do you think that they have it in them this year to get back into that big game?
Well, I think they're one of the most talented teams in football. I certainly think roster-wise they project to have a top 5 roster. So from that standpoint, they should be a significant contender, and I think everything kind of falls into most NFL seasons from there. How healthy are you? Are you healthy at the right positions? And are you able to overcome some of the things you have to go through? I don't know if any veteran player's ready to go on April 15th. I think they kind of roll their eyes, and it is kind of a necessary evil. But it is April 15th, and you don't have to play until September. So, no, I don't think they're ready to go. But I don't think anybody's ready to go on April 15th. I think it's more important, I say this every year, for the younger players, off-season work. And it's kind of a pain in the you-know-what for the veterans who are proving themselves. But it's what I said. It's a necessary evil.
Yeah. John McMullen, a lot of other things. I mean, Carson Wentz, by the way, spoke today, and he said he was not fully healed, said, I'm still getting there, not participating in the voluntary workouts, hopes to be ready for OTAs. But are you a little bit surprised that he has yet to be cleared?
Yeah, I am surprised, and that to me was the lead of the guys talking today, besides maybe how tough Jason Kelce is. But, I thought he would come back and say, I'm completely ready to go, no issues. And he didn't say that, and he said he was still healing. So I think the antenna has to be raised a little bit, and we'll see. They don't do on-field work till May. This is phase 1, just strength and conditioning. The quarterbacks can throw the football to the receivers a little bit. No coaches on the field. So he doesn't have to be ready, but I did think he was going to say he was completely ready to go, and that did not happen today. And if you go back to when the Eagles shut him down, Doug Peterson hates timetables, but he did say 3 months, and that was December. And 3 months from December, January, February, March, here we are, April 15th, and he said he's still not completely ready. So I think there's a slight concern, but I wouldn't panic.
Right. Well, that whole story was bizarre to begin with. Like, he wasn't on the injured list. He possibly could have played. And then there was people thinking that, they just held him out because Foles was playing so well. Well, here we are in April and nothing.
Yeah. I mean, look, if it was May and if it was the on-field stuff, I think it would be bigger.
Right.
And he wasn't ready for that. So I think now you kind of red flag that and see if he's not ready then you start asking those questions. What the heck is going on here?
Okay.
This team is and they're not the only team in the NFL, and it's shifting in that direction. When it comes to injuries, they don't have to talk about them in the off season, and they don't, and they do everything possible to try to not talk about them. So I think part of it was just that, and Carson trying to get out of it and not give out too much information. I do expect him to be ready for the start of on-field OTAs.
Right.
And if he's not, like I said, that's when you should start being concerned, because that means it was a little bit more difficult than even the Eagles made it out to be originally.
Talking with John McMullen, a couple of quick other Eagles news. Zach Ertz restructured his deal, right, over the weekend. I guess it was either Friday or Saturday, just to give the Eagles a little bit more cap flexibility, just more tricks by Howie Roseman.
Yeah, and this is all, I think anytime you hear about a restructure or a movement of money, people assume it's for something now. I don't think it's for something now. I think what he's doing is trying to create space for the inevitable Carson Wentz extension, and that's coming soon, sooner rather than later, whether it happens this offseason, whether it happens in season or next season. And it's going to be a lot of money. It's just a matter of how much. And when you talk about where the top quarterbacks are in this league, you're hearing a lot of Russell Wilson talk right now. But you know the numbers, 25 on the good end. It's moving past 30 million. And the longer you wait, the bigger that number is going to be, unless something bad happens. So you need money for that extension, and that's what I think Howie Roseman is doing right now.
And lastly, local story, Zach Berman tweeted this out a little while ago that the Eagles have brought in Millville running back Rykel Armstead. He was a Temple guy, 5'11", 220, ran a 4.4 40 at the Combine, and I guess it shows the Eagles have some interest in running backs probably later on in the draft.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they're going to add a running back, maybe even two, whether it's not going to be in the first round. It might not even be in the second round, but when you start talking about the fourth round, they don't have a third-round pick unless they get back into that round. Then I think they start looking for value. And it's interesting because their local pro day is Wednesday. And that's when they can bring in all their local prospects, and they don't count against the top 30 visits. So, it is interesting from that standpoint because they have a lot of young players they want to look at, whether it could be priority free agents, whether it could be late-round picks. And it's always a good story if you get a local kid, but it's more important to get a contributor. And the Eagles are trying to sift through all that information right now.
All right. Plenty of NFL leading up to the draft, but some Eagles stuff today. What is the rest of their week looking like?
Well, as I said, today was the start of phase one of the offseason. Hopefully the first 2 weeks are just strength and conditioning. They have a little bit time on the field. As I said, quarterbacks can throw to receivers, but no coaching. The only coaches that can be on the field are the strength and conditioning guys. So that's what phase one is. Howie Roseman is going to talk about the draft coming up, but that could be as soon as tomorrow. And we'll see if that shakes out. But phase one. And it all kicked off like the first day of school today.
Like it. All right. Plenty more football leading you to the draft. Next Thursday, April 25th, is the NFL draft. And, of course, we will be live at the Wonder Bar in Atlantic City. Get yourselves ready to go. We will send out another keyword on tomorrow's show. You must have the 97.3 ESPN mobile app to get the keyword. John McMullen. Follow him at JF McMullen. Thank you, pal.
All right. Have a good night, guys.